For 2 decades, I stood by my amazing wife and her family. Our marriage was tight-knit, full of love that held us together. We had a boy and a girl, living what seemed like a flawless life with no regrets. Or so I believed. Just when I thought we'd be happy forever, she tragically drowned. Her sudden loss broke me apart. Grief took over, and tears became my constant shadow. While going through her stuff, I stumbled upon a property deed for a house I didn't recognize. My curiosity got the better of me, leading me to the address. What I found there was beyond anything I could have imagined. The house was decked out with elegance, radiating warmth and luxury. There hung a portrait of my wife, her first love, and their twin kids. It felt like a stab to my heart. On the desk was a hastily scribbled letter. "Kenji, since you're gone, life's been unbearable. I can't take this pain anymore. The kids are with Hiro now. I hope he takes good care of them. No regrets. Let's meet in the afterlife, together forever." Rage surged through me as I shouted, "My money, all my money went to them, and now you expect me to be thankful." I staggered back, overwhelmed by betrayal, thinking only about digging up her grave for answers. But the anger was too much. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was back in the 10th year of our marriage, right at the beginning. The police had called to say they found my wife, Yuki's body in the Westlake Reservoir. I was burning the midnight oil at work, tweaking project details for a tough client. Over 40 and dealing with health issues, yet still working past 10 p.m. like a mule. The call hit me hard. At first I thought it was a scam. "Stop wasting my time. Scams can rot in hell," I snapped, but the officer on the line stayed calm. He gave his badge number and explained that night, fishermen had found a woman's body with an ID card identifying her as my wife. He urged me to come quickly to help with the investigation. Doubts filled me as I hung up. I tried calling Yuki multiple times on my way to the reservoir, but her phone was off. 40 minutes later, I arrived at the spot the officer mentioned. The night was pitch black, only the sound of rushing water and distant animal cries breaking the silence. I stumbled towards a single beam of light cutting through the darkness. There on the riverbank lay a woman's body. She was in her favorite black dress, now dirtied beyond recognition. Her shoes were missing and her bare feet had deep cuts. Blood dripped from her orifices, staining her face with eerie lines. When I saw her face, I froze. Thunder seemed to rumble overhead. It was her. It was Yuki. After a full investigation, including an autopsy and checking surveillance near the reservoir, the police ruled out foul play. The report showed alcohol in her system, concluding it was an accidental drowning while intoxicated. When our kids found out about their mother's death, they rushed back from abroad. Overwhelmed by grief, I collapsed several times from high blood pressure and ended up in the ICU. The kids took charge of the funeral arrangements. By the time I left the hospital, Yuki had been buried. When the kids brought me to her grave, I was shocked to see Yuki buried next to her ex-husband, Hiro. They had divorced over 20 years ago. I looked at my kids in disbelief. My daughter, Mia, spoke calmly. "This was Mom's wish. She left a will for us. The lawyer gave it to us when we got back home. You should check it out." Trembling, I took the document. It was true. Yuki had wanted to be buried with Hiro. Mia continued. "The last page shows how assets are divided. All insurance payouts go to me and my brother. Her personal things, bought before marrying you, are also ours. About the house, Mom left your 50% share to you, but the other half needs to be paid to us at market value. Or you can sell the house and split the money equally with us. We've got our green cards, and once everything's sorted, we're not coming back. Take care of yourself." I stared at the kids I'd raised for 20 years, my throat tight. My voice was barely a whisper. "How can you be so ungrateful? I've been married to Yuki for 20 years, fathering David and Mia when they were just 5. I loved her deeply, cared for her, and raised her kids with all my heart. I supported her parents with dedication and respect. And yet, in the end, you took everything from me." I stumbled home with what little strength I had left. The house was just as it had been when Yuki was alive. We'd lived here for nearly 20 years. I bought this old apartment when we married, even though it was her second marriage. I handed over a dowry worth tens of thousands to her and used my savings to add her name to the title without hesitation. The apartment was over 30 years old, small, shabby, and cramped. Its usable area barely spanned 80 square meters, yet it had housed 5 people, including my mother-in-law. For years, I worked tirelessly to fund David and Mia's studies abroad and cover my mother-in-law's monthly dialysis treatments. I scrimped and saved, often leaving myself with only a few $100 for living expenses. I always told myself things would get better. Everything would get better. But now I realized I'd been nothing more than a tool for their family. My gaze was empty as I began packing up Yuki's stuff. While cleaning her wardrobe, I found an old magazine with a faded photocopy of a property deed. The owner was listed as Yuki. Following the address, I hired a locksmith who checked my ID before opening the door. When I stepped inside, I was stunned. This was clearly Yuki and Hiro's love nest. The walls were covered with photos of them and their twin kids. The interior was lavishly decorated, cozy, sweet, and full of luxury. Expensive furniture, plush carpets, and a sparkling chandelier filled the space. It was a stark contrast to our dilapidated, cramped home where we could barely move. I headed to the master bedroom. The room was massive, with a walk-in closet, a dressing table, a king-sized bed, and a wide sunlit bay window. The closet was neatly organized with undeniably expensive clothes. Next door was a study. The sight of the study hit me hard. The walls chronicled their family's happiness, with photos from the twins' elementary school years to their university days. Taken in scenic spots around the world, I stood there, paralyzed, struck by lightning. I suddenly remembered Yuki telling me how her financial skills kept our household afloat. I had even thanked her for it. But it was my money. All my money. They had taken everything to fund their lavish lifestyle, leaving me with scraps, just a few $100, and now they expected me to be thankful. I collapsed into a chair by the desk, where a piece of paper lay open with a handwritten message. Hiro, since you passed 2 years ago, I've been lost in thoughts of you, unable to bear the pain. Now that Mom is gone and our kids are grown, I have no ties left. Let's reunite in the afterlife. This wasn't an accidental drowning, it was a suicide born out of love. In a fit of rage, I tore the paper into tiny pieces. I don't know how long I sat there before standing up, clutching my knees for support, stumbling out of the apartment. I was filled with one burning desire, to dig up Yuki's grave. But the fury was too much. Blood gushed from my mouth as I staggered back, my vision darkening, and I fell. When I came to, I was sitting at a table loaded with food and drinks. The room buzzed with lively chatter, plates clinking, glasses tapping. It took me a moment to realize, but then I remembered. It was the party we threw to celebrate David and Mia's success in their high school entrance exams. Both got into the best high school in the city with full scholarships for 3 years, and each snagged a 6,000 yen scholarship. At this moment, Yuki and I were leading the kids around, toasting to our friends and family. Everyone was praising Yuki, calling her a model mother and a university professor who raised such outstanding kids. Sitting next to my mother-in-law, Hiro wore a smug smile, looking at Yuki and the children with pride as if their achievements reflected on him. I downed my glass in one gulp. The bitter chill of the alcohol reminded me this wasn't a dream. Still dazed, a mocking voice cut through the noise. "George, you're really lucky. A guy like you married our campus beauty, Yuki. What a steal, and you even got 2 great kids for free, truly enviable." I turned to see who had spoken. It was Luis, a university senior 2 years ahead of Yuki. He now taught at the same university in the philosophy department. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Hiro raised an eyebrow and smirked, clearly enjoying the show. Luis clicked his tongue and added, "How did you get so lucky? 10 years ago, even after paying a hefty dowry, no one wanted to marry you. Who knew our dear Yuki would stoop so low? So many men chased her, yet she chose you. What a tragedy." I looked at his twisted expression, finding it both amusing and pathetic. It wasn't a secret that Luis had feelings for Yuki for years, only for his friend Hiro to beat him to it. By the time he learned of their relationship, Yuki was already 2 months pregnant. Their friendship ended there. Luis married someone else in heartbreak, only for Hiro to abruptly divorce Yuki and abandon her with their 2 kids to move abroad. Luis never let go of his resentment over not marrying Yuki. He often targeted me, using every chance to poke at my old wounds. In the past, I always felt inferior and would meekly endure his jabs, swallowing my pride. These same words had been said to me in my previous life, and back then, I had kept quiet. After all, it was a celebration for my kids. Their teachers and classmates were there, along with some of Yuki's colleagues. I hadn't wanted to cause a scene or give others a reason to laugh at me. But now, none of that mattered. I slammed my chopsticks onto the table with a loud crash and roared, "Lucky? Damn right I'm lucky. Jealous, are you? Why don't I hand her over to you? You've been pining after her for over a decade, haven't you? Maybe then you can stop acting like a clown in front of me every few days?" Luis's face turned pale. He glanced nervously at his wife and stammered, "George, what nonsense are you spouting?" I sneered. "Nonsense! Those disgusting messages you sent to Yuki. The way you drool over her every time you see her. Do you think no one notices? Calling me a cripple over and over to humiliate me. Does that make you feel big? Let me warn you, if you dare call me that again, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair." Yeah, my leg was broken in a fight, but it was Yuki who insisted on marrying me, and you, the goddess you worshipped, didn't even want her after her divorce, even with 2 kids. So what are you showing off for? Everyone's eyes turned to me. Luis's wife glared at him with humiliation and fury. Yuki hurried over and tugged at my sleeve, frowning in displeasure. "What's wrong with you? Do you have to bring this up in front of everyone on such an important day?" I yanked my arm free and replied coldly, "Bring it up? Did I start this? He's been provoking me every single time. Are you blind?" Luis's wife bit her lip and approached him. The next moment, a loud slap echoed as she hit him hard across the face, leaving him stunned. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the banquet hall. The previously noisy room fell silent. Hiro, who had been sitting back and enjoying the spectacle, stood up. He walked over to stand beside Yuki, a polite smile on his face, though his eyes gleamed with provocation and scorn. In a measured tone, he said, "George, no one's judging you for your past, but there's no need to flaunt it in front of everyone, is there? You're now the backbone of this family, Yuki's husband, and the father of 2 kids. Bringing these things up doesn't just demean you. It embarrasses Yuki and makes it hard for the kids to face their peers in the future." I followed Hiro's gaze to David and Mia, standing not far away. David's fists were clenched tightly, his eyes bloodshot, while Mia's eyes brimmed with tears, glaring at me with hatred and disgust, remembering how they had coldly waived Yuki's will at me in the cemetery, pressing me to sell the house and split the money with them. I let out a bitter laugh. Their real father isn't dead. What right do I have to call myself their dad? When he's dead, maybe then we can talk. Hiro stammered, How can you say something like that?" He faltered, turning to Yuki with a frown. A flicker of resentment crossed Yuki's eyes as she grabbed my sleeve again, pulling me back and whispering sharply, "George, what's wrong with you? Everyone's watching. Do you really want people to look down on us?" I turned to face her, and waves of overwhelming hatred surged in my chest. Sensing the tension, one of the guests quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "Professor Lin, come on. We need your advice on raising kids. My son keeps failing his exams. How do you usually communicate with your children?" Gradually, the noise returned to the banquet hall, the awkward atmosphere dissipating. I sank back into my chair, my gaze cold as I looked around. My chest felt tight with anger. Pouring myself another drink, I downed it in one go. I knew the smartest move now was to divorce Yuki, leave this parasitic family behind, and start fresh. But after being deceived for an entire lifetime, how could I simply walk away and let go of this hatred? The banquet eventually ended. guests leaving until only Yuki, her mother, Hiro, and the twins remained with me. My mother-in-law's grating voice broke the silence. She sneered, "George, you may not care about saving face, but we do. What's with your pity show? Are you desperate for everyone to know you're a cripple? Do you think your past is something to be proud of? Getting into a fight at school and ending up with a broken leg? How disgraceful. Serves you right. Why didn't you hit someone else? Have you ever reflected on that? Even if you were a millionaire, no one in our family would take you seriously. You're nothing but a useless cripple. You're not worthy of our Yuki." Yuki cut in, "Mom, can you stop? George is a victim here. Why do you have to say such things?" I looked at my mother-in-law, robust and full of energy. At that time, she hadn't been diagnosed with chronic kidney failure. Naturally, she didn't need me to take her to weekly dialysis appointments, prepare her meals, or cater to her every need. In my previous life, after her diagnosis, Yuki developed a hospital phobia and left me to care for her mother for nearly 8 years. Rain or shine, every Saturday I drove her to the hospital. She passed away peacefully just 2 months before Yuki's suicide. Thinking of Yuki's farewell letter, where she wrote about fulfilling her filial duty, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. What duty? It was all on me. I let out a cold laugh and said, "If I weren't a cripple, do you think I would have even looked at Yuki? You think your daughter is so exceptional? Even her associate professorship was a handout. If it weren't for my father working himself to secure her a recommendation, she'd still just be a junior lecturer. Don't act all high and mighty while playing the victim. You're just a family of hypocrites." My words hung in the air, freezing the room in oppressive silence. My mother-in-law, caught off guard by my bluntness, turned pale, her face twisting in anger. She trembled uncontrollably, too enraged to speak. Standing nearby, Yuki seemed hurt by my words. "George, are you sick? All this fuss just because Louis said a few things about you?" she yelled. Mia chimed in, raising her voice. "This is supposed to be my and David's celebration banquet. What's so great about being a cripple? Why did you have to bring up those embarrassing things? How am I supposed to hold my head high in front of my classmates now? Why do you always ruin everything for everyone?" I took a deep breath, suppressing the fury that threatened to boil over. Turning to Yuki, I said, "You're right. I am sick. Do you have a cure? Let me say this one more time. If I hear him call me a cripple again, I'll make sure he spends the rest of his life in a wheelchair." Then I shifted my gaze to Mia. "And who are you to me? Whether you can hold your head high in front of your classmates has nothing to do with me. You're short, ugly, and have flared nostrils. Honestly, letting you take my last name was humiliating for me. Who can I complain to about that?" Mia froze, utterly stunned. Though she and David were twins, their appearances were vastly different. David resembled their father, while Mia looked just like her grandmother. Her composure shattered. She burst into tears, stomping her short legs out of the banquet hall. I had no interest in continuing the argument. Grabbing my jacket from the coat rack, I left without another word. Outside the hotel, the sky had turned completely dark. The summer night breeze carried a faint coolness, though it still felt sticky against my skin. I kicked a pebble as I walked, my mind swirling with chaotic thoughts. Memories of the past flooded back, suffocating me like water filling my lungs. In my second year of high school, I was bullied. After rejecting a classmate's confession, I was ambushed on my way home by a group of thugs. The security wasn't as good back then, and many alleys lacked cameras. They demanded I kneel and apologize to the girl. I resisted with all my might. In the struggle, I kicked the leader hard. That single act enraged him. He threw me to the ground and swung a steel rod down on me with brutal force. When he was done, he dumped me like trash by a bin. My parents searched for me all night. By the time I was found and taken to the hospital, it was too late. The injuries left me permanently disabled. When the doctor broke the news, my mother fainted on the spot. My father's hair turned white almost overnight. Though the gang leader was sentenced to 10 years in prison, the damage was irreversible. I spent 3 months attached to a catheter and underwent a full year of therapy before I could function again. From then on, I became withdrawn, self-loathing, and unworthy in my own eyes. I refused to date, convinced I didn't deserve anyone's love. Then I met Yuki. She was like a beacon of light piercing the darkness of my life. I thought she was my salvation, the guiding star that would steer me out of despair, so I poured everything into our marriage. I endured her mother's harshness and the resentment of her kids, fueled by their grandmother and biological father. I worked hard to maintain peace despite their constant antagonism. I cherished the marriage, believing in its worth, but I never imagined that Yuki, the light in my life, was the shadow hiding behind it. She was the hand dragging me into the abyss, condemning me to eternal torment. All the good memories turned into sharp blades under her manipulation, cutting me to pieces. By the time I reached home, it was nearly midnight. The house was dark, suggesting everyone had gone to bed. On the balcony, a faint rustling sound broke the night's silence. It was oddly eerie. I turned on the light and walked to the balcony to check it out. There I saw a bamboo basket covered with a fine mesh sack. The noise was coming from inside. The sight sent chills down my spine. Inside the basket were venomous snakes. This was disturbingly familiar. In my previous life, after David and Mia's exam results came out, my mother-in-law claimed her prayers to Buddha had been answered. She somehow got over a dozen venomous snakes, planning to take the kids to a mountain to release them. When I found out, I strongly objected, suggesting she release carp instead. She scoffed, saying animals released in rituals couldn't be eaten later. She still wanted to eat carp but had no intention of eating venomous snakes. Seeing I couldn't reason with her, I took matters into my own hands. Early one morning, while she was out walking in the park, I took the snakes to a wildlife rescue center. The staff were horrified when they opened the bag. It was full of highly venomous banded critters. Since these snakes are nationally protected, they immediately called the police. I endured a long hour of criticism and had to sign a written guarantee that I wouldn't engage in illegal wildlife trading before being allowed to leave. My mother-in-law was furious, accusing me of ruining her spiritual progress. I turned away from the balcony and went back to my room. This time, I had no intention of interfering. Early the next morning, my mother-in-law returned home with breakfast in hand and loudly instructed Yuki, "Go wake David and Mia for breakfast. We need to take them to the mountain for the release ceremony afterward." Yuki pursed her lips and said, "Mom, can't you stop involving the kids in these superstitious rituals?" My mother-in-law shot her a glare and retorted, "What do you know? If I hadn't prayed to Buddha back then, do you think the kids would have done so well on their exams, or that George could make any money? It's all thanks to Buddha's blessings." Yuki frowned slightly, but seeing she couldn't argue, reluctantly went to knock on David and Mia's doors. After the kids finished washing up and sat down at the dining table, my mother-in-law served breakfast to everyone except me. I didn't mind. I went back to my room, grabbed the IDs, marriage certificate, and household registration I had prepared, and slammed the door on my way out. I hailed a cab straight to the real estate registry office. As expected, a 230-square-meter property was listed under Yuki's name. The registration date was 3 years ago, coinciding with the year Hiro returned to the country. The mortgage had been paid off just 2 months ago. I asked the staff to stamp the inquiry document for me. Shortly after finishing a meeting, my office phone rang. I pressed the speaker button. David's panicked voice came through, crying, "Dad, please come quickly. Grandma got bitten by a venomous snake during the release ceremony. She passed out from the pain, and I can't carry her. We're on the South Hill, halfway up, the spot where we picnicked last time, near that huge boulder. Mom's phone isn't working. Dad, I'm scared. The snakes are everywhere. Get away from me. Don't come near." His terrified scream sent chills down my spine. He continued, "Dad, can you hear me? Please hurry." I instinctively picked up my phone, ready to dial 911. But just as I was about to press the call button, my hand froze mid-air. I slowly put the phone back down. Surely the Buddha my mother-in-law prayed to would protect her and her grandchildren, wouldn't it? I spoke into the receiver. "David, I'm out of town. Try calling your mom or dial 911 for help." There was a brief silence before he said, "Dad, I'm calling you on your office landline." I was momentarily speechless. Recovering, I said, "What I mean is, I'm just about to leave for a trip. The cab is already waiting downstairs. I can't help you right now. Good luck with that." I hung up and turned off my phone. My mother-in-law was bitten multiple times by banded critters, and David was bitten twice on his left calf. Mia, dealing with menstrual cramps that day, had stayed behind and narrowly avoided the disaster. Since the incident happened in the middle of the mountain, it took over 3 hours after their initial call for emergency services to locate them. The critter venom, being highly toxic, had devastating effects. My mother-in-law had already fallen unconscious, and David was showing symptoms like blurred vision and slurred speech by the time help arrived. Both their lives were saved after extensive emergency treatment. However, my mother-in-law's condition was dire. She had been bitten in multiple places, with deep wounds causing severe necrosis and gangrene. The doctors warned this was just the beginning. Her muscle tissues in the affected areas were likely to completely deteriorate, making it nearly impossible for her to walk again. As for David, his leg showed signs of numbness and weakness. Even more troubling, the doctor explained that critter venom affects the nervous system, potentially causing memory loss, difficulty concentrating, sleep disturbances, and irreversible damage to multiple organs. For a student about to start high school, the prognosis was devastating. I showed up at the hospital 3 days after the incident. Claiming I was out of town, I had to keep up the act. The moment Yuki saw me, she nearly screamed, her voice shrill enough to make my ears ring. "Where have you been these past few days? Why couldn't I reach you? David was bitten by a snake and called you, but you didn't rush to help. If you had brought the rescue team sooner and they'd gotten the antivenom in time, their condition wouldn't be this bad. I can't count on you for anything." I glanced at the 2 patients lying in their hospital beds. One was semi-conscious, while the other stared blankly at the ceiling. I sighed. I was sent out of town for an emergency assignment. My phone was stolen as soon as I arrived. How was I supposed to know something happened at home? Then I countered, "Wait a minute, I told David to contact you right away. Didn't you go to help them? What kind of mother are you?" Yuki froze, the hysteria fading from her voice. I pressed on, feigning disappointment and anger. "One of them is your own mother. The other is your son. How could you be so cold-blooded, and now you have the nerve to blame me? What exactly were you doing that was more important than saving your mother and son?" A flicker of guilt crossed her face, and her tone softened. "I didn't mean to blame you. It's just, you disappeared for 3 days, and I was so worried. I didn't mean to blame you. It's just, you disappeared for 3 days, and I was so worried. I was just too upset. Since you're here now, could you stay and help take care of Mom and David? I need to go home and take a shower." I rejected her outright. "No, I've got a mountain of work to deal with back at the office. Hire a nurse to take care of them." Yuki bit her lip, clearly displeased, but in the end, she nodded. David was discharged from the hospital before my mother-in-law, but he seemed to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. He often woke up screaming from nightmares and avoided areas with dense greenery. Even the rustling of leaves in the wind made him cover his ears and scream in terror. Seeing David like this, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Once, I had truly cared for him and Mia as if they were my own children. But now, if anyone were to blame, it would be his grandmother's Buddha for failing to protect him. By mid-July, registration for the new high school term began. However, David's condition made it impossible for him to attend. I went to the school and filed for his leave of absence, which was quickly approved due to his excellent exam results. When I handed the leave of absence certificate to David, he covered his face and broke down in tears. Perhaps he realized that this leave was merely a temporary escape. He would never return to that prestigious high school. I sighed silently. This was the last thing I could do for him. I put our old apartment on the market through a real estate agency. Though the place was old and cramped, it was in a good school district and could fetch a price of 500,000 to 600,000 yen. However, I had already lined up a buyer who would purchase it for just 300,000 yen. The day before my mother-in-law was discharged from the hospital, I checked myself into the same hospital. Over the years, my salary card had been in Yuki's possession. I had always scrimped and saved, never asking her for money. So when I asked Yuki for money to pay the hospital deposit, she was stunned. Do you have to be hospitalized right now? Who's going to take care of my mom after she's discharged? She asked, visibly annoyed. Looking at the displeased woman before me, I handed her the hospitalization paperwork and explained that a nodule had been found in my lung. The doctor recommended immediate surgery. The nodule was small, but it pressed against my trachea, causing persistent coughing. The doctor suggested removing it as soon as possible. In my previous life, I had delayed the surgery for 3 months. This time, I intentionally scheduled it earlier. Yuki pressed her lips tightly together, taking several deep breaths. She looked like she was about to explode. But in the end, she maintained her dutiful wife persona and handed me my salary card from her purse. I called my cousin, who was home for summer break from college, and asked him to accompany me at the hospital for a few days. The day after my surgery, while my cousin went downstairs for lunch, Yuki appeared in my room with several documents and asked me to sign them. Still weak from the surgery and unable to eat, I felt groggy. Yet, she insisted. She explained that one of her friends had recently lost her job and was now selling insurance. Buying a few short-term policies would help her meet her quota. It's not expensive, just 100 or 200 yen per policy for a 1-year term. Just help me out by signing at the bottom. I'll take care of the rest. She handed me a pen and even took out her phone, preparing to record the moment. Just then, my cousin returned to retrieve his phone, seeing Yuki pressuring me to sign something. He looked surprised. Sis, what's so urgent that my brother has to sign it now? He's barely coherent. Can he even read the documents properly? Let me take a look first. As he reached for the documents, Yuki quickly gathered them into her bag and forced a stiff smile. Oh my, I forgot he just had surgery. I was only thinking about helping my friend with her insurance quota. We'll wait a few days for him to recover before signing anything, she said before hastily leaving the room. My cousin shot her a suspicious look and muttered, Sis, you're not trying to sneak in a loan agreement or something shady, are you? Though said in jest, his words made Yuki's face turn pale. She snapped back, What nonsense are you spouting? You're a college student. How can you be so rude? With that, she fled the room in embarrassment. My cousin looked dissatisfied, but I handed him his phone and apologized on her behalf, urging him to go eat and not take her words to heart. He reluctantly went downstairs, still fuming. The next day, during the doctor's rounds, I was advised to start moving around to help with my recovery. My cousin borrowed a wheelchair and suggested we go for a stroll in the hospital garden while the weather was still cool. After walking for about 10 minutes, we grew tired and sat down on a bench behind an artificial hill to rest. Suddenly, a familiar female voice caught my attention. Hiro, I'll come over tonight. Why did you come to the hospital so early? I turned and followed the voice. Yuki was leaning into Hiro's arms, holding a thermos, her expression a mix of bashfulness and exasperation. I placed a finger over my lips, signaling my cousin to stay quiet, and moved slightly behind the artificial hill to listen. Hiro frowned and said, I can't stand the thought of you spending 2 hours making chicken soup for that cripple. Does he even deserve your kindness? Yuki giggled and replied, Are you jealous? Hiro, every time I come to your place, I'm the one cooking and making soup. Now that he's sick, I've only brought him food twice. Besides, you wouldn't want him to become gravely ill, leaving my mom and the kids without support, would you? Or do you plan to take care of us? In that case, I'll divorce him right away and remarry you. Hiro scoffed. I'm not stupid. Why would I take on that burden? Let him spend his money and effort raising my kids for me. Isn't it perfect? A free ride is always better. As for your mom, who could put up with her temper? I'd rather stick with what we have now. No strings attached. He then asked, By the way, did you get him to sign that gift agreement to transfer the house to my name? Yuki pouted. Not yet. That brat of a cousin ruined it. I almost succeeded. It's not a big deal if he doesn't sign it himself, but if he ever finds out and takes it to court, it might get revoked. I'll find another chance. Hiro chuckled. Take your time. I'll be waiting. He reached for the thermos in her hand, saying, Let me try your cooking first. I haven't had breakfast yet. Yuki hesitated, but eventually opened the lid for him. Hiro smugly raised the thermos, took a sniff, and then a sip. The next second, he spat the soup back into the container, grimacing. Why is it so bland and greasy? It's disgusting. This soup isn't fit for me. Let your dear husband have it. Yuki smiled sheepishly, dabbing at his mouth with a tissue. It's supposed to be light since he just had surgery. The chicken might have been a bit fatty, but I'll make a fresh pot for you tonight. Hiro, wait for me downstairs. I'll take this up to him and be right back. The two of them walked toward the hospital building. My cousin, who had been silent, turned to me. His face streaked with tears. He gripped my wrist tightly, his hands trembling with rage. I forced a smile at him. His tears flowed more freely as he choked out, Bro, I want to kill those bastards. I patted his back gently, trying to calm him down. Killing them would be too easy. I want them to live, those bastards. I patted his back gently again, trying to soothe him. After being discharged from the hospital, I discovered that Yuki had temporarily sent her mother to a care home, likely planning to bring her back for me to care for once I recovered. Hehe, how convenient. The real estate agent called, informing me there was a buyer for our apartment. When Yuki found out I decided to sell the house, she exclaimed, Are you crazy? Where will we live if you sell it? I smiled and replied, I'm planning to get a bigger place. This apartment is too cramped for a family. She frowned. We don't have the money for that kind of upgrade right now. With my mom's condition and David's physical therapy, money is tight everywhere. Sure, this apartment is old, but it's in a convenient location close to the hospital, and we don't even need a car to get there. Looking at her meaningfully, I said, I don't have much money myself, but don't you? You've been managing my salary for years, haven't you? And all our expenses came from my paycheck. What about your earnings after you became an associate professor? Don't tell me you don't have any money. Yuki's expression faltered slightly. I do, but most of my money is tied up in investments. I can't withdraw it immediately. Seeing her bring up investments, I pressed further. Well then, since you've invested our shared funds, I'll need to review the details. After all, this is marital property. I just want to verify the amounts you've invested and ensure they align with your income over the years. Of course, she wasn't going to let me check. Those funds had gone into purchasing the house, and even if there were investments, she never intended to share them with me. No problem, I said. I made a quick call to my lawyer, asking him to come over and notarize an agreement. I requested that Yuki confirm under oath that all investments under her name as of today were considered marital property. She hesitated, her face flushing as she bit her lip. George, what are you implying? Do you suspect me of something? I shook my head with a smile. If these investments were made with our money, then they're marital property. This is just a formality unless, of course, you're hiding something from me. Of course not, she snapped. Then why won't you sign? I asked. Yuki was at a loss for words. Seeing her reluctance, I turned to the lawyer. If my wife has secretly transferred assets, how can I legally trace her financial transactions? Yuki's body trembled, and the pen in her hand fell to the ground. The lawyer, catching on, replied earnestly, You would need to apply for a court order. Once granted, a lawyer could assist in tracing all her bank accounts and financial holdings, including stocks, funds, and bonds. However, this process is typically only pursued during divorce proceedings for asset division. But before he could finish, Yuki had already signed and stamped the agreement, handing it to me. I took it with a faint smile and asked the lawyer to record the notarization on video. A month later, the house was sold. The transaction closed at 300,000 yen, with the buyer being a friend I had arranged beforehand. Yuki was incredulous and called the agent multiple times to confirm. The agent patiently explained that while the apartment was in a school district, the new elementary and middle school campuses were under construction and would relocate within 3 years. After that, the area would essentially become an urban slum. Yuki, no fool, tried to cancel the sale. The agent produced the contract she and I had signed, explaining, If you unilaterally terminate the agreement, you'll need to compensate the buyer 20% of the sale price. I interjected to smooth things over. Forget it. Selling for 300,000 yen is already decent. Mrs. Tanaka next door only sold her 100 square meter place for 380,000 yen. Once the schools move, it'll be impossible to sell. My dad heard we're upgrading and even offered to pitch in 500,000 yen. Let's just move on. Mrs. Tanaka had indeed sold her place for 380,000 yen. But it was to her sister-in-law she had already purchased a new home, hearing that my father would contribute to the new house. Yuki reluctantly let the matter drop. The 300,000 yen from the sale was transferred to me immediately. I threw it all into cryptocurrency, ensuring the funds would lose value. My friend bought low while I bought high, recovering the funds on his end. This money was destined to be a total loss in my hands. After selling the house, I hired movers to relocate all our belongings to Hiro's upscale apartment, the one registered under Yuki's name. David followed me nervously. When he realized the moving address was his biological father's home, shame overwhelmed him. He flushed red, fidgeting with his hands. I laughed and said, "You're familiar with this place, aren't you? I'm sure there's even a room here for you." His face turned beet-it red as he wrung his hands anxiously. Knocking on the door yielded no response. In David's presence, I called the police and a locksmith. I informed the officers that my property had been illegally occupied. With the intruder changing the locks, I presented the necessary documents, including a stamped property search result. With the locksmith's help, I opened the door without issue. Hiro arrived just as the movers were finishing up. He erupted in anger, yelling, "Get out! This is my home with Yuki. What does this have to do with you?" I calmly pulled out my marriage certificate and waved it in his face. "This property is marital property, shared between me and Yuki. You're the one who needs to leave." The police confirmed the property was under Yuki's name, and as such, was marital property, shared between me and Yuki. "You're the one who needs to leave." The police reiterated that point. They informed Hiro that he must vacate immediately and could face legal action and financial compensation if I pursued the matter further. Hiro froze in place. He fumbled for his phone to call Yuki, hoping she could intervene. I sneered at him. Yuki was in no position to help. Just 2 days ago, I had sent all the evidence of their affair, collected by a private investigator, to the disciplinary committee at Yuki's school and the local education authority. She was probably being investigated as we spoke. After work, Yuki learned about everything that had happened. Surprisingly, she didn't lash out at me as usual. Instead, she knelt before me, pleading and apologizing profusely. She claimed that she had only lent the house to Hiro temporarily and had kept it from me out of fear of misunderstanding. After spewing her excuses, she tearfully begged me to speak to my father, asking him to use his connections to help cover up her misconduct at school. Without intervention, she said she would no longer be able to work as a teacher. She choked on her words as she promised to sever all ties with Hiro and devote herself fully to our family. I stood over her, watching in silence. A scandal over her misconduct was minor. There were much bigger storms on the horizon. Using the excuse of convincing my father, I moved back to my parents' house. Mainly, I wanted to distance myself in case she couldn't handle the impending blows and did something irreversible that might implicate me. Not long ago, while rummaging through an old laptop of Yuki's, I decided to refurbish it for 200 yen to see if there was anything useful on it. To my surprise, I found evidence of plagiarism in her academic papers. Nearly 30% of her content was lifted through translated copying. I reported the findings to the journal that had published her work. It didn't take long for them to issue a retraction notice, removing her paper from their database and blacklisting her from future submissions. The journal also forwarded evidence of her misconduct to her university, which immediately launched an investigation. What shocked me even more was when Luis submitted his own formal complaint against Yuki. He accused her of plagiarizing his research, selling co-authorship credits, and inflating project budgets. I later learned the reason behind his drastic actions. Following the disastrous banquet, Luis's wife had filed for divorce. She had heard whispers of Luis's obsession with Yuki before, but the final straw came when she caught him begging for her forgiveness. Devastated, Luis drank himself into a stupor and stumbled into a bar, only to witness Yuki and Hiro kissing. In his drunken rage, he tried to fight Hiro but was slapped by Yuki in front of everyone. Only then did Luis realize he had been nothing more than a pawn in Yuki's schemes for years. Furious and humiliated, he filed a public complaint, with others taking action. I joined the fray and sued Yuki for bigamy and for concealing marital assets. However, Yuki used every excuse in the book to avoid attending court hearings, delaying the trial indefinitely. Mia seemed unaware of the chaos engulfing her family. She called, yelling at me for not sending her living expenses. "I've messaged you so many times asking for money. Are you ignoring me on purpose?" I hung up mid-rant and blocked her on all platforms. After 2 months of investigation, Yuki was stripped of her academic title and dismissed from her teaching position due to misconduct and plagiarism. She was also ordered to repay any misappropriated funds. The day after her dismissal, I received a call from the care home, informing me that my mother-in-law had died of respiratory failure before they could arrange emergency medical care. I relayed the news to Yuki. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I didn't attend the funeral, citing poor health. From that point on, their family affairs had nothing to do with me. That evening, while working late at the office, I received another call from the police. They informed me that Yuki had fallen into the Westlake Reservoir but was rescued by a night fisherman, who called 911 to have her sent to the city hospital. At the hospital, I learned that while Yuki's life wasn't in immediate danger, her thigh had been severely cut by a sharp underwater object, leading to a serious infection due to prolonged immersion. The doctor presented me with 3 treatment options and began to explain each in detail. I interrupted, "Just tell me which one is the cheapest." The doctor hesitated before replying, "The cheapest option would be amputation." "But amputate," I said without hesitation. The doctor seemed taken aback. "There are other options, such as vascular surgery or a transplant. Amputation isn't the only solution, especially since she's still young." "Just amputate," I insisted. "I can't afford a transplant or any of those other surgeries." "Where's the consent form? I'll sign it." Reluctantly, I signed my name. I wasn't about to spend a fortune on her medical bills, especially since we were still married. Any expense she incurred would fall on me as well. Choosing the cheapest option was only logical. Since waking up from her surgery, Yuki had been in a dazed state, unable to distinguish between past and present. I picked up her phone and dialed Hiro. She stared at me like I was insane. The moment Hiro's panicked voice came through, he said, "Yuki, where have you been? I couldn't reach you for days. Mia's teacher says she's distracted by a puppy love situation, and David's mental state isn't improving. I don't know what to do and couldn't find you anywhere." Hearing Hiro's voice, Yuki became visibly emotional. With disbelief, she asked, "Hiro, you're alive? Didn't you die 2 years ago from pancreatic cancer?" She turned to me, her tear-filled eyes seemingly begging for confirmation. On the other end, Hiro replied, "What's wrong with you? I'm perfectly fine. Who told you I had cancer?" Yuki pressed on, "What about David? Were they bullied abroad?" Hiro sighed in frustration. "Are you out of your mind? It wasn't abroad. Your mom dragged him to the mountain for that ridiculous ritual, and he got bitten by a snake." Yuki's body trembled and her pupils constricted. She abruptly tried to get out of bed, tossing the covers aside. It was only when she saw that she was missing a leg that she froze. Her expression was a masterpiece of despair. She stared at her severed leg for what felt like an eternity, her body collapsing back onto the bed as if all strength had left her. Minutes later, the hospital room was filled with Yuki's heart-wrenching cries. Despite numerous court summonses for the divorce proceedings, Yuki refused to appear. Thankfully, the evidence I provided was sufficient for the court to proceed in her absence. As the party at fault, she was awarded 30% of the marital property. Custody of the children was naturally granted to her. Additionally, Hiro was ordered to return all assets Yuki had secretly transferred to him. After the division, I kept the house and the car, while the rest went to Yuki, finally free from that toxic family. My life became lighter and more relaxed. I quit my job, bought a camper van, and decided to travel while I was still young. I began recording my journey and uploading the videos online. Unexpectedly, the content gained a large following and eventually started earning me an income. I decided to become a full-time travel vlogger. The next time I heard about Yuki was 2 years later, during a meal with friends. Someone mentioned her. They said that at Hiro's engagement party she caused a scene, smashing hotel and wedding decorations in a fit of rage. Hiro called the police. She paid for the damages but was also detained for 15 days. After her release, she spent her days drinking in bars, utterly ruining herself. Mia dropped out of high school due to Yuki and Hiro frequently forgetting to send her living expenses. Mia moved in with a wealthy schoolmate, hoping to secure financial stability, but instead, she became pregnant. The school expelled Mia after the incident. Yuki, dragging her disabled body, went to confront the wealthy family, only to have dirt thrown back at her. They claimed Mia had willingly sold herself. The wealthy family paid 60,000 yen to bury the matter. The young man continued his studies and scattered, while that sum effectively ended Mia's future. Hearing all this, I couldn't help but feel a tinge of sorrow. Memories of the past surfaced, and I let out a faint sigh. Later, Hiro was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer again. His fiancée left him as soon as she found out. He tried to return to Yuki, only to find that she had disappeared without a trace. No one knew where she had gone. Time flew by, and 2 more years passed. I no longer traveled as often, instead using the time to buy a villa with a small yard while property prices were still reasonable. I adopted a cat and a dog and filled the garden with flowers and plants. One evening after dinner, I took the dog for a walk in a nearby park. Behind me, a trembling voice called out, "Dad." I turned around to see David. He walked with a slight limp, wearing a blue-gray work uniform with the name of a machinery factory embroidered on the chest. His eyes were red, and his face was full of emotion. I froze for a moment before smiling and gently correcting him. "I'm not your dad anymore. You can call me Uncle." He shuddered, and tears began streaming down his face. The dog strained against its leash, eager to run ahead. "It probably wants to play up ahead. You're welcome to visit me at home if you have time." Turning away, I continued walking, but my vision grew blurry. In my mind's eye, I saw 2 small children from years ago, a shy little girl and a boy with wide, curious eyes. The boy had asked, "Who are you? Why are you in our house?" I had patted his head and replied, "I'm your dad." The children's eyes had lit up with excitement as they hugged me and shouted, "We have a dad now. I'm going to tell everyone in kindergarten that I have a dad too." But how had it all come to this?